Hello, and thank you for joining us on today's Renewed Minds. This edition is brought to you by the We Can Food Drive, a food drive that is conducted each fall to collect food for the Interfaith Food Pantry and the Montgomery County Christmas Store. Canned foods and monetary donations are needed. Today on the podcast, as always, we'll be discussing challenges and opportunities that we all face no matter the season of life we're in. So in each episode, we'll offer some practical tips we've learned over the years and also share how love and grace can help each one of us when we're trying to maintain hope. So today in the studio, we have Tommy McDearis, the pastor of Church on Main in Blacksburg, Virginia, and Tonya Dinkel, owner and coach of Life in Action. Today's topic, the faithful voter, religion and politics in 2024. So we've already seen this election season becoming one that is straining families, relationships, churches, and work. So what are those challenges and opportunities on this topic?
And there are more than a few of them, wouldn't you say?
Gosh, yeah, and I would say that this isn't the first time that there has been division in families and friend groups around politics.
It goes back a long way. It just seems like it is worse now than it used to be.
I think it's gotten progressively worse over the last several election cycles. Mm-hmm. Like in my lifetime, it has gotten progressively worse. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't know that I see it getting a whole lot better.
Yeah.
Our country seems even more divided, and that's showing in other places.
It's fortunately not as bad as it was just before the Civil War started, when you had politicians beating each other in the House of Representatives and senators striking each other with canes. That was probably about as low as it was going to get just before the sparks really started flying with the war. Mm-hmm. But in modern times, I don't know that I have seen it any worse than it is now.
So I'm curious to get your take on how you think social media might be making it different.
Oh, I think social media makes it very different. You get to say things on social media that you wouldn't say to someone's face. Mm-hmm. And so too many people on both sides of the coin launching the tirades toward others because of their views, and it tends to escalate and escalate and escalate until it reaches a point to where there's just blatant anger going on, and yet you don't see the other person's face, so it doesn't matter to you.
Yeah, it's taken mudslinging to a whole new level. It's not just on the TV. It's everywhere. And I think about this younger generation, particularly the Gen Zs, who are getting most, if not all, of their news from social media, whether it is TikTok or Instagram, I think are the two big ones right now. Such slant toward the, as you said, throwing things out without any sort of repercussion because you're not actually saying it to a person, and the damage that can be causing.
And the other side of that is those young people that are listening to that, where most of us that have been around a little longer would get angry, but would also get very involved. They're getting disillusioned as much as they're getting brainwashed about some things. Yeah. And I think that's truly what's happening.
And it's not their fault. It's not their fault. The fact that it is having the impact that it is not even the fault of these young adults. They don't know a world that doesn't have these resources available. And our education system, regardless of where you came up through the system, whether it was a public school, private school, homeschool, you've been exposed to something that is shaping your worldviews. And it's being reinforced by the social media that you choose to follow. And the critical thinking piece is not what it used to be when, respectively, you and I both were being taught to think critically.
One of the interesting things with this generation is that they've never known a time when it wasn't like this. Mm-hmm. And so they don't have anything to look back on and say, I remember a time when. And honestly, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it seems like a long time ago, but when Ronald Reagan was shot in an assassination attempt, one of the first people to go to the hospital with him was Tip O'Neill, and Tip stood beside him, held his hand, prayed over him, and they had an agreement that they would disagree from 9 till 5 and after 5 o'clock. It was friendship time.
What a novel idea.
I know. Wasn't that a novel idea? Well, you just don't see that anymore. The senators don't even play basketball together anymore, which they did, up until a few years ago when they were not in the Senate chambers.
Well, and even baseball games where they are trying to do something that is community related ends up in gunfire.
That's right.
So it's just a scary place that we live.
It really is a scary place, and in some ways, one of the glitches is you don't quite know how to get back to that. It's not going to get back to it until politicians step back and say there's something more important here than our agenda.
So I would challenge: do we want to go back, or do we want to go forward in a different way?
I would hope that we would want to go forward in a different way. I think there are lessons. I'm a history guy. You may not have noticed that over the time that you get him, but I look back on history and I think, there was a time when. We don't want to go back and pick up just when there was a time when, but there are lessons that we can learn from history of how to get along with each other. And then move that forward and say, okay, how can we make new history that's better than what we're doing right now?
So much of it is learning, too, from the history in the past, because history does repeat itself. And I know you've heard that phrase a time or two, right?
Of course.
It absolutely will. And I had someone very wise tell me one time that if you don't learn the lessons that God is trying to teach you, he tends to try to teach the same lesson over and over, which in my mind is history repeating itself, because that's how it's played out in my life before.
Or it's certainly how it's played out in mine. I've found myself in those kind of positions a lot of times, and but I really do wonder. I am an old geezer. I actually worked in the Carter presidential campaign, so I remember that time well. The interesting thing about that is I had great respect for Gerald Ford, who was running against President Carter. It wasn't like these two men weren't devoted Americans who were truly trying to see the world and see America as a place that was worth investing in and making a difference. Well, how do we claim that and then move it forward to something new and better and it's not so divisive? And I wish I could sit here and say, well, boy, I've got the answer to that.
Yeah.
If I did, I'd bottle it and sell it. But right now, I don't know exactly. I don't quite know how you bring people together who don't want to be together.
Yeah. I mean, certainly there has to be a common desire to find a common ground, right? But I think, honestly, it starts with understanding and accepting ourselves as individuals and our own perspectives, and then by extension, that other people are doing the same, right? Which means I have my opinions and my feelings and my beliefs, which may be different from yours. That doesn't make yours wrong. It makes yours different. Now, I know that you're probably going to say if mine are different from yours, mine are wrong, but we're just going to say that they're different, right? Yeah. And we can agree that we may not agree on everything, but we are coming to it from a place that is authentic to us as individuals and what we believe. And I think that's one of the fundamental things that's missing right now, especially when we start talking about politics, is that there is, and I think a lot of this is fueled with social media, but there is a feeling or a perception that there is a right and a wrong. And this gray space that most people are uncomfortable navigating in is probably more of where reality sits, where there is right and wrong on both sides, and it's not fully one or the other.
One of the interesting things of recent years is poll after poll shows that the majority of Americans fall somewhere in the middle. It's the extremes of the two parties that tend to tear us apart in that. When you get students together, there have been forums where students have come together who are from very different point of views, yet they would sit and they would converse with each other about their points of view, and they would come to respect each other in that process. There have been people who are grown adults who various groups have brought together just to sit and talk about their points of view, and it's amazing at how much they have in common and how much they respect each other once they come out of the room. The sad part is that our leaders tend to foment the division in ways that the average American does not. I think the average American would love to come back to a place to where we actually work together on some things.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think also the media tends to sensationalize with the two extremes.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah. Maybe every now and then.
I think that could possibly be a possibility.
Yeah.
Out of
Well,
that.
it sells.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I can name a few, but I won't get into that right at the moment. But yes, I think you could not be more correct on that one. Because, it's kind of like in the old days, they used to say, war sells newspapers. If you sensationalize, people tend to watch it, listen to it, pay attention to it. I don't know why that makes more sense to people than sitting being reasonable, but it just does.
I think there's a piece of it that just seems more interesting than the day-to-day that they feel that they're living. Mm-hmm. And it is something to escape to or from, depending on their perspective. I think that might have something to do with it.
Oh, I think that's very much the case. I do remember years ago, Senator Howard Baker, who was a center-right Republican from Tennessee, but he used to sit down at the table with other center-left Democrats, and they would work on legislation together and argue adamantly about it. But he made the comment once. He said, most of the answers to the problems of America have not ever been found on the extremes. They've been found when people would sit down and compromise to look for a good solution to an issue. And to some degree, I think that sense of compromise and that looking for a good solution is what's been left behind, because we do have leadership out there that seems to really enjoy watching division, it seems.
Compromise is an interesting word.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people, when I was learning language and words, specifically compromise in this case, it was truly understanding that both sides give up something to both sides get something, right? But it feels like the perspective or perception of that word has changed, and that compromise is focused more on the loss these days.
That's true.
Are you seeing that too?
What are you losing if you compromise? I just saw that this week, actually.
Okay.
And I heard some people talking about that. If you compromise, you are agreeing to lose.
Yeah.
Well, that's a ridiculous statement to start with.
Right.
But it certainly doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't move anything forward. It just keeps the division growing deeper and deeper. Now, I'll be honest enough to say there's some things I think you shouldn't compromise on. When the civil rights movement was happening, there was no room to compromise of whether a black person was equal to a white person, and should they be able to eat in the same restaurant or vote and cast their vote or walk down the sidewalk without having to step off the sidewalk for a white person. There are some things in life that's worth arguing about, and that there's not a lot of room to compromise on, because it's inhuman to treat somebody as less because of the color of their skin.
Right. Or their gender.
Come up with the list
any
of
number
them.
of any number of things. And the sad reality is it's still happening.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Every day.
It's still happening.
Yeah. So how do we move forward?
Well, one of the things that the name of this podcast is Renewed Minds.
It is.
I think that one of the things that we have to figure out is how to come to that place where we are renewing our minds. You may have noticed that I'm pastor of your church.
Really?
Yeah. And so, as pastor of a church, I tend to think from that perspective periodically. And one of the places that I tend to think is Romans 12:2, of be not conformed to the things of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things we have to try to do is, at least from my perspective, is ask, what would God have us do, and how does He want us to think about certain things? How do we renew our minds in the midst of the struggles that we're dealing with? And not just as a person of faith. There are people out there who are not people of faith at all, but they're trying very hard to get people back to a place to where they can actually sit across the table and talk civilly.
Yeah.
And what they're trying to do is renew their minds.
They are, and when that issue of bringing God into the equation, that's scary for some people, or it is so unfamiliar to people. It's not been conversation that has been in their life, either much or at all, there can still be a desire to reset and renew, as you said. And that can be done by just identifying what it is that you as an individual believe at your core, also known as your core values. What is important to you? What is your why? What motivates you? And start from there. If you come in through the spiritual lens, then that's going to probably look something like, what is God's purpose for me? If you're not, it could look like, just what is my purpose? Why am I here? Right? Very similar questions on both sides with just a slightly different slant to it.
And I think we've got to try to find that sense of purpose while also maintaining some kind of a sincere moral balance in the way that we approach things. I read this week where someone was saying, they were referring to the disasters that have happened in North Carolina and in other states around the hurricane, and their line was, not one dime to other countries until we fix our country. And my glitch with that, when I think about it, is that's assuming that if you come at it from a religious point of view, that a child in the Ukraine is less important than a child in, it's the America First policy, except I don't really think God looks at it that way. I think he looks at the world and sees these are my children.
Right.
And we need to take care of them. We also need to not lose track of the fact that we're the wealthiest nation that the world has ever known. I bet we can do both.
Imagine.
I bet we can pull that off. So what is our purpose? Our purpose is to take care of each other and not to see one group of people as more important than another group of people.
Yeah. And that also means respecting other people's perspectives and the fact that, like we were saying earlier, that might be different from what we personally believe. And honestly, the energy that it takes to argue a point with someone who is equally passionate on the other side is amazing. So why spend that energy arguing when you can actually spend that energy either off doing something that will do good or maybe collectively with a group
trying to
pushing something forward.
Difference with that.
Yeah.
I agree. It's just, and that does seem to be what we're doing a lot these days, is spending a whole lot of energy just wearing ourselves out. Just wearing ourselves out on our arguments and our frustrations and making enemies out of people that no reason in the world to be an enemy.
Yeah. Yeah, like our family.
Yeah, like our family, and that does happen in the world.
It does.
You've got the people out there. I had someone on my brain this week, and Ricky Castles used to go to our church. Ricky, we used to make jokes about Ricky, and that he came here as a freshman in college, and he stayed through his PhD. Our joke was he was born here and is going to die here. But Ricky was pretty far to the right on his political views, that kind of thing. Yet he was best friends with people in this church that were far politically from where he was. They tended to try to focus on what they had in common and leaned into what they had in common. Yeah. Well, a lot of us are still very close friends with Ricky, and he would call us the same thing. It doesn't mean we have to agree on everything, but we do need to try to find what are the things we do agree on, and how do we capitalize on those to try to renew some minds out there so that we're not all arguing about every single thing. Yeah.
I think, so your story reminds me of a story from when I was probably early 20s, and I got into a literal shouting match with my grandfather over politics. He was very opinionated. And my grandmother actually had to come between the two of us. We weren't physically going at it, obviously, but it was really bothering her that our voices were getting that elevated. And it was funny because in that moment, there was definitely a renewed mind on my part, but it was a renewed mind of, let's not have that conversation again. It's not worth the argument, right? But also realizing that we could be equally passionate in two very different directions. And again, neither of us be completely wrong. Yeah. And there were just things that were more important that I chose to focus on going forward. So I did never speak about politics again with my granddad. Still, actually, avoid politics with most of my family members. But I've become very acutely aware of what is really, truly important when I am with them, which is the time, the experiences, pouring into them, and letting them pour into me, just so that we can fill each other's cups proverbially and continue to grow and love, because that's how, knowing that support is there through tougher times, other, challenges that I face, is important to know that that's kind of my army behind me. And I've not let something like politics come between.
When I'm dealing with family or friends, I try to remember that, the first call is to love one another. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, family's neighbor. There's not any, distance in that. It's are we going to love, or are we going to choose to love? Yeah. And you have to choose to love, or you're going to let issues get out in front of who you are meant to be in this process. And that's, and I don't always, I'm not ever going to completely agree with some of my family on those kind of things, but that's not going to get ahead of our love for each other. At least I'm not on my side. I'm going to try my very best to stay where I need to be in that lane.
Yeah. So for folks that are listening, if we're going to kind of summarize some things that could help, as they're starting to really get into the final stages of this election cycle, which is proving to still be interesting. I think we can agree on finding purpose in ourselves, right? What are we here for? And acknowledging the value in the gifts that we bring to that purpose, and choosing to love, which is sometimes the hardest of those three things to do.
That can really be tough sometimes, and especially when that division, when the voices start getting raised, as you were with your grandfather, you have to remind yourself of who you are and why you are in this room to start with.
Yeah.
What are we may not be in the same room, but we're in the same life. What do we want to bring out of that?
Right.
And what do we want to bring to that?
Right.
That's going to move us forward.
Yeah. So you've done lots of pastoral counseling over the years. Just in general, how do you guide people in the choice to love someone else?
Oh, I try to encourage them to stop, look at the other person, and say, what do I like about this person? What do I see of value in this person that and I'm coming at it from a theological point of view, Christian point of view of, what would God see in this person that they would love, and what should I try to love in that process? Where can be our points of commonality, and how can we work together to try to get there? Are there places where we could actually physically get involved and serve that would highlight what we have, what we believe in together than what divides us, rather than that? I have always felt that one of the best ways to get people to be well acquainted with each other is get them on mission with each other around something. Swing a hammer together. Carry food to someone together. Spend a few hours in a car together and talk about things that you admire about one another and that you admire about others. It really does make a difference. It takes your mind off whatever it is out there that you might get yourself worked up about.
Yeah. And I think understanding that is not going to be a quick process. It is not a situation where you're going to have a 20-minute car ride across town where you're talking about things that you love, and you're going to get to the destination and you're suddenly going to love the person.
That's
it doesn't always
true.
work that way. It is sometimes a slow process, and it takes work. It's intentional work.
My very old and tired brain has just gone dead here on someone's name, but there's something on Facebook right now, but I've read the story on several other places about an African American man who won over people who were in the Ku Klux Klan. He simply would not give up of making sure that he got to know them and they got to know him. And what really turned out of that was they all became friends, and he now has the Ku Klux Klan robes and hoods that these people gave him because they suddenly realized this black man is a fine person and I've been wrong. Well, sometimes you have to step back and realize you may have been wrong on a few things, or may have been wrong on something that was that big and that important. Yeah. And the reason you came out of that is because somebody tried to love you through it. That's exactly what this gentleman did. Sure would be nice if I could remember his name. I can just see his face if that helps anybody, but I cannot remember his name.
That's a good story though on choosing love, because that's a really tough scenario. I mean, that's one of the hardest points in our recent history that our country has gone through, and I think a great example of truly making the choice, and how hard that must have been for him, and for those that he was loving too, because that's got to be a foreign feeling. Oh,
it had to be. These people, in their minds, he was someone to hate, and they were out there protesting the very idea that he might be equal. Yet this man did not stop going and trying, and they all agreed to sit down and talk, and it was amazing what came out of that over time. It didn't happen in one meeting. It didn't happen in two meetings. Right. But if we can make the commitment to actually try to spend some time, get to know each other, we may find those points of commonality.
So you said at the beginning that if you had the answer to how we could handling politics and relationships, that you might try to bottle it. You might have just hit on something. Taking time to invest in people, learn about them, learn to love them.
Listen to what they have to say, whether you agree with it or not. Spend time talking about those issues where you disagree, and agreeing going in that you are not going to let it devolve into a shouting match, but it is going to be a time of discussion. A time of trying to get to know each other, of getting to know each other's families, getting to know what hurts you. Because a lot of times people come to the points of view that they have simply because they've been hurt somewhere along the line, and they think candidate X has an easy answer to this enormously complicated question, but I'm going to vote for them because they're going to fix it. Well, I've got news for you. There ain't no candidate out there going to fix some things quickly. It takes time to get there.
Yes, yeah. So it's over the recent years. I find I'm doing it more and more in recent years. I find myself saying something to the effect of, "Can we just be grown-ups?" And I've done it in my professional practice. I've done it in my coaching practice. Can we just be adults? Can we be grown-ups? And it sounds like that's what you're talking about, and how you've coached people in your arena to be grown-ups.
Where it often happens with me, and it's going to sound like this doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about, but it still does. Some of my counseling sometimes has to do with people who are in marriage situations or family situations that are just breaking down completely. The process is different, but it's still the same. Is you have to sit down with people and spend some time trying to walk them through what are the struggles that you're dealing with, and why are they there, and how did they get there? Yeah. And then reminding them in the process, there was a time when you loved one another. Then when was that? What was it? And how did it work out?
Yeah.
Daryl Davis, very good. Yes, that was the man who challenged the Ku Klux Klan. It's a great story. It really is.
Okay.
I'm not going to read it or tell it all today, but go to the internet. You'll find it. It's a great story to read when you have more time.
Yeah. So one other thing I want to touch on about, you were talking about how this counseling or coaching that you do is similar to marriage counseling. And I think anyone who is married or just been in relationships understands that sometimes the disagreement, the difference of opinion is big and it's intense. And I remember hearing my parents got marriage advice of don't ever go to bed angry. And I've heard other people say that too. And it's funny, my husband and I made an agreement that we were maybe on occasion going to go to bed angry because we need some sleep and we need some fresh perspective. But the key is that when you wake up the next day, you finish the conversation, you get to a resolution point of whatever that looks like.
And even there, you may not get to the place where you fully agree on something.
You may not.
But
you may not.
You get to the place where you say, okay, I'm willing to work with you in this.
Right.
And
the reason is because you love that person
That's right.
more than you love being right.
Yeah. And I can give the testimony on that one. I adore my wife. I've been married for 45 years, which will tell the world how old I really am. And getting there, sometimes we just have to agree to disagree, and that's okay. You go on, and you make things come together. And I don't find that hard because I value that relationship a whole lot more than I value being right. There's going to be people out there who might argue whether I would be that or not, but it's still a reality. I generally value relationship a lot more than I value being right.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I'm in the same boat on that. All right, so our tips to help people get through this season: finding purpose and acknowledging their strengths in their purpose, choosing to love, and taking the time to let that choice play out.
And realizing that it's not going to be easy. Yeah. These things may sound like they're going to be easy to do. They're not easy to do. Sometimes it's not even easy to get someone to sit down and talk.
True.
Don't give up on that.
Yeah.
Keep trying to work at it. Daryl Davis discovered that. I mean, African-American man showing up at a Klan meeting probably was the most comfortable day that he's ever had in his life. And I can imagine that those folks really didn't want to see Daryl Davis walking through the door. But he kept going, and he spent time getting to know those people, and it did renew minds and transform values.
Yeah.
And so, I think it was a guy named Jesus who was insisted on not giving up on things.
It sounds like
keep
something
pushing
Jesus
forward.
would have said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, the title of this podcast is Renewed Minds. How we can reset our mind to do all of these things. Prayer is a great way to do that. If you're not one that regularly prays or is comfortable with praying, meditation is also something that you can do to help center your mind. And there are probably some others. Those are two big ones that I tend to recommend to people.
Those are two big ones that I would recommend to people in a heartbeat. That I think it is so important to actually have conversations with people that, don't look for something that would divide you. Start out on something that you just have in common, that you enjoy talking about, and that you like this person, and so you're going to have a conversation with them. And then when you do hit on something that you don't agree on, make a conscious decision not to let that be the dividing point of the relationship.
Yeah, and if you started on common ground, then you've got a foundation that you're building that on.
You're building on something important right off the bat.
Yeah. So we have been talking about being a faithful voter, or we've been trying to talk about being a faithful voter. So what do we do with all of the information that we've been talking about today? So if we were to summarize some things that our listeners can take away from this segment, let's go ahead and take a few minutes to do that. So I think, first of all, know that you still have to vote. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if you're confused, it is still so important that you vote.
Don't decide you're not going to vote because you don't have the exact candidate you would like to have.
Exactly.
Very seldom are you going to have the exact candidate that you want to have.
Yeah.
But our democracy depends on us going out and voting and taking a stand on things.
Absolutely.
So go vote.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, the HR person in me is always erring on we don't have the right candidate. Let's leave the position open a little bit longer until we find the right candidate. We don't have that option, right? The position is going to be filled. So let's do our due diligence in the research and let's vote. Now, Steve, who is our producer, was sharing an interesting article with us just yesterday. So Steve, can you share a little bit about just getting out and voting and what is the trends are looking like right now?
Yeah, I was reading an article this week that indicated millions of Christians in the United States indicated in a study released on Monday that they're not likely to vote in the upcoming election this November, which is going to be a problem, just in itself, that we're not getting the voters we need. But it just says over half of the interviewees in a cultural research center at Arizona Christian University study identified as people of faith responded that they're not likely to vote in the election, which is interesting in its fact. The people of faith label is given to those who identify as a recognized religion such as Christianity, Judaism, Mormonism, and Islam. So it's a wide variety of people who are of faith. This was a study found that approximately 1.4 million people under the umbrella of faith are not expected to vote in this election. There's two big takeaways from this. That first, that Christians could be a deciding factor in a bunch of elections, and they're choosing not to be. Second, that they are longing for their local church to instruct them on how to think biblically about policy and politics. They don't want to be told how to vote, but they want to know why they should vote and how to view the political issues from a biblical framework. Yeah. The statistics were pretty crazy that included that back in November, they not planning to vote in November included a lack of interest in politics was 68%, a dislike for both major party candidates, 57%, and a belief that their vote will not make a difference, 52%. And a smaller percentage, about 48%, believe that the election results will be manipulated. So there's a significant number of people of faith who say, I'm not going to vote.
Yeah.
When 48% though says that they're afraid the election's going to be manipulated, that's significant. That's a big number. That's distrusting our system, and the statistics show that you can trust our system. That we have probably the most successful and free elections in history, and that they are not manipulated. There are a lot of safeguards around that. Yeah. So get out and go vote.
That's right.
And count for our country.
That's right. Okay, so that's the first one. Go vote. The second one would be aware that through all of the marketing, all of the literature that's being put out, lots of ads, your opinion is being influenced, and that is the intention of those things. And that doesn't make it wrong. You don't need to be mad at these people. That is their job, to make sure that you are aware of what the options are. But just be aware that the whole intent is to sway you one way or the other. And just be aware of the language with the way that things are being presented.
Sometimes things are said in such a way to try to stir people's emotions and to get them into an emotional state about the election rather than actually giving you facts that you can follow.
Right.
Try to look at those facts and see what those facts are and evaluate your vote around those.
Yep, exactly.
And try to, as much as you can, try to keep your emotions out of that.
Couldn't agree more. And really nice segue, by the way, into number 3, which is center yourself on your own values. What's important to you? What is driving you? What are the topics that are important to you? What are the causes that are important to you personally? What impacts your family? What's going to impact your day to day? These are the things, the framework that you need to be using in evaluating the research that you do to determine who you are going to vote for.
Absolutely. And, I spend a whole lot of time, as you can imagine, focusing on the values that I hold and what is the centerpiece of those values. And it really does affect a lot of what I do, including my votes. I try to evaluate around what would my faith say to me about this election. And sometimes it says things differently to me than I might have thought when I first started out. So focus yourself on those values and just spend some time looking at what you base your life on, whether you're a person of faith as far as religious faith or other things. What do you base your life on, and how do you do that? And then ask one more important question that I think is out there is what kind of country you want to live in. Let's think about the kind of votes that we want to cast here, but around what do we want our country to look like in the years ahead?
Yeah. And then once you do those things, the last piece, which may be one of the most important pieces, is pray. And if you're not one that prays, meditation is a great way to take that final preparation step. The benefit of either praying or meditating is it's at the end of the day, it brings you focus. It calms your body, it calms your mind, it allows you to center your thoughts on something, and that is focus. And that's what we need at this point in time is focus. And Tommy, as you just said, where do we want to be? We need to focus on that and what's going to get us there. And the decisions that we make now are going to impact where we're going.
I'll give you another piece around prayer and meditation. It doesn't ever hurt to do both of those.
That's true.
I wouldn't be in the business I'm in if I didn't believe in the power of prayer. But I also spend a lot of time meditating, just thinking about, not only what brings me peace, but what do I need to be focused on to get where I need to go in the days that are ahead.
Yeah.
Pull both of those pieces together. Now, I know there's going to be people out there that's going to say, well, that's just insane, and that's fine. A lot of people think I'm insane.
Yeah, that's true.
But go ahead and focus on your faith and then meditate on what brings you peace and what you think that you need to do as far as this election goes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this has been an emotionally charged discussion.
No, do you think?
As it probably is with many of you listening. But thanks so much for joining us. And we invite you to participate in the dialogue with us. So share your perspectives on faith and politics. You can certainly send us a message. We actually have an email that is now live. It is renewedminds@churchonmain.church. Yeah, so feel free to send Tommy and I messages. We would love to hear from you. And we don't expect everybody to agree with us. Tommy's used to us not always agreeing with everything that he says. So please feel free to share your thoughts and be a part of this conversation with us. Over time, I think we would love to come back and revisit some of these topics with comments that you guys provide. In the meantime, please continue to listen, subscribe, leave us a review, share this podcast with people that you think might find it beneficial or entertaining, whichever the case may be. And then join us next week where we are going to explore why obeying can be good. And Tommy promises to bring in the topic of marriage vows. So if that's not a poll, I know I'm interested to see where that goes. Yeah. So thank you guys so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Hopefully this brings a renewed perspective to the challenges and opportunities you're facing today. What steps are you going to be taking to show love and grace to everyone? If you have any questions or comments about our podcast, please send an email to renewedminds@churchonmain.church. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. Listen next week for the next Renewed Minds.